location and food, and we would eventually like to get to the point where we have a professional videographer record them all also, which San Francisco always has. So please keep those 3 things in mind and let us know if you can help.
All right, cool. Definitely looking forward to that September one, because I think a lot of folks are actually interested in knowing about different topics. So when you RSVP for that, after, of course, we have the volunteers for the competent people for Selenium, you'd be able to ask those questions, and we'll go into a lot more detail around those questions and kind of presentation topics that everybody would like to hear about. With that, moving on to the real stuff. So for today's presentation, we have Ganesh. He usually is in India, and he's visiting for his company here in San Francisco, and he volunteered to give this presentation. As a side fact that I think a lot of folks may not know, besides the bio that he put in on the Meetup page, he tried his luck with playing a few games. He tried long distance running, and it was too much running and too much on his legs. And then he tried playing some tennis, and it was too much for his arms. So then he said, okay, I think I'll probably take too much on my brain, and he decided to become a software developer. With that, I would like to welcome Ganesh and hear about his topic for behavior-driven testing.
To everybody down there? Okay, great, cool. All right, so welcome to this talk, and feel free to ask questions as we go along. And if it is a little minded one, then I'll park it to be discussed when we finish the talk. All right. Okay. So how many of you have already heard about behavior-driven development? Excellent. So half of the house knows about it. Great, fantastic. Okay, so let's get started. I'll just lay out the agenda for the day, for the evening. So we'll have a brief introduction to the concept, and then how BDD came along, right? And how did Cucumber come along, right? And then what is basically this, combination of Selenium, Cucumber, and JUnit, right? So I'll basically, give kind of demos related to web application testing using Selenium, along with Cucumber, JUnit, and the programming language that I've chosen for this demo is Java. Okay, so let's get started with a very basic question first. What is software testing, right? So anybody wants to take a dig? All of us do software testing over here, so I'd like to hear. Anybody? So what is software testing?
Giving bad news.
Giving bad news, excellent. And good news also, that it's ready to ship, right? Alright. Anybody else? Okay, so for me actually, software testing comprises of 2 terms, software and testing, right? So if you look at software, so what is the software? Anybody again? Anything? Yeah? Apps, okay, fantastic. Anything else?
Something in text.
Something in text.
Text.
Okay. All right.
That follows some syntax.
All right. Excellent.
Whatever moves hardware.
Whatever moves hardware. Okay. Great. Interesting. I love those answers. Yes, please.
Instructions for computers to perform computation.
Excellent. Excellent. So that's the technical part of it, right? But the people who are going to consume this technology, what about them? So what about them? Anything? Anybody wants to take a dig at that? Okay, so since we may run out of time, Manoj has already told me, so I will not go deeper into these things and discussing these. So software is basically a computer program, which is more technically a set of instructions, right? You all know that. But whenever we are shipping a software, there is a purpose behind it, right? And it is very important to understand that purpose, right? more broadly takes some input and gives output to serve a requirement, right? And this is purpose for certain stakeholders, right? So it is very important to understand, who those stakeholders are and what is the value that they are going to get out of it, right? Now, I'll come to this, part about the stakeholders, right? Who these are later on. And what is testing? Yeah, it is giving bad news and the good news. What else?
Making sure that the product is aligned with the stakeholders' requirements and
Excellent.
what they're expecting from.
Fantastic, right? So the users want a good quality of the software, and an activity to get information about that quality is what we refer to as the testing. That is comparing against the requirement and the risk which is there that the users and customers are going to use this product, right? We want to reduce that risk. We don't want app to be crashing. We don't want buttons not to be working, right? Because rolling that kind of product in the marketplace will have a lot of risk. And as you rightly said, making sure that the stakeholders are getting value. And who's responsible for it?
QA.
The whole team.
So that's the pitfall actually, right? So the whole team is responsible for it, right? That the stakeholders are getting value.
When you say
Right?
responsible, do you mean who will be blamed for it?
QA
Okay,
can be
so
blamed.
I will not go into the behavioral part again. I can discuss this maybe offline. But the blame and responsibility, right, are two different things. Okay, so that's the way I used to basically coach my engineers, right, when I was a manager, right, that you should not take something as a blame, but you should take it as the responsibility that you owe, right, and it basically changes the concept, the mindset totally, right, and it's all about the team actually, right. So let's say if US and Canada teams are in a ice hockey match, right? And you never say that guy lost or won. It will always be either US won the match or Canada won the match, right? So similarly, when you deliver a software, right, product, it's all about the team, right? So it's not about the individual actually. And in terms of what to test, everybody out here is doing day in and out. So I'll just quickly go through it. So that it is very important, having set this context, that is very important to understand who the stakeholders are and what is their context, right? The context is different for different people. The context for the management to ship the product may be totally different, right? From the context of basically the user and customer who is going to use it. Again, there is a distinction between a user and a customer, right? So for example, the company may be giving the laptops to the employees, right? The customer is the purchase manager, right? But the users are the end users who are going to use that product, right? So the context of the customer vis-a-vis the context of the user are two different things actually. So whenever a product is getting shipped in the marketplace, right, there are various players as stakeholders and their context is totally different. For a CFO of the company, the context is how the revenue numbers are going to look up this quarter, right? That is his context to deliver the product in the marketplace. But for let's say a director engineering or VP engineering, the context is totally different. That what is the quality of product that I'm going to roll out in the marketplace, right? So many a times, basically, people think the stakeholders is only the user and customer, and in that, right, the confusion that comes out is that the management and especially the executive management is not a stakeholder, and the team themselves are a stakeholder actually, right? Because the people who are working on that product, right, their reputation is at stake. Okay, so and that is going to ultimately impact them. Okay, so it's very important to understand that what is the value that we are going to deliver in the marketplace, and the value people are looking for in terms of of course, the features, which is going to give particular functionality in the product, right? And there are non-functional things, as you all know, usability, performance, etc., etc. And then these stakeholders may be working in different environments, like the operating system, languages, third-party tools, hardware configurations, and so on. And why we want to test it, therefore, that we want that these stakeholders, right, get the value that they want to get actually, right? So, and that is what going to derive their acceptance. And you may have heard about a term called NPS score, right, the Net Promoter Score, and the products that get rolled out in the marketplace, right? If the users and customers are going to accept that product, right, they are going to tell to other people, right, as promoters that okay, this product is good, let's you also try it out, right? But if they don't find it good, that is, they don't accept it as a good product, right, they are going to be detractors, right? And that's why things like NPS are very popular as a measure of how the acceptance is getting driven in the marketplace for the product. So it is very important for the team to look for the perspective of these stakeholders. Very important, right? You can't basically be on your own, trip, right? And the team is on a different trip. Many times what happens is, so most recently I was working with I was consulting a real estate major in India. They were rolling out an application on the Android and iOS, right? And their product manager was talking something else. The engineering team was, the programming team was talking something else. The testing team was talking something else, right? And one fine day I, go and they say in, 6 weeks time we have to ship the product. I said, how did you get to this 6 days shipment date, right? And they said, well, the management has said that 6 weeks we have to ship this product. I said, okay, if you really know what it takes, what is in plate for you to basically, deliver this product? Have you even done an estimation of that? I said, no, this is the way this happens. I said, no, this is not the way it is going to happen. You got to estimate, and the estimation has to come from the people who are going to deliver this product, right? And then it took almost a week to do the estimation, and then, it was almost a 3-month delay, right? And finally they did it, and the rating of the app was good. But the point is that, it is very important at times to understand the perspective of the different people and then bring them together at a common thing, right? And also, you have to educate people along, right, to reduce the gap in the expectation. So, users, customers, management, etc., these are all stakeholders, and ultimately the company's reputation on quality is at stake, and hence its valuation and return to the users and customers and the investors and the shareholders, right? So, especially if it's a public company, right? So, the stock will take a beating, and if you have stock options, then you will also get a beating, right? So, everything goes down the drain actually. And the company that I'm talking about, their average rating was around 3, but the next app that they released, right, their average rating was 4.5 plus. So it takes time to build, right, and deliver a good product, but it's not that if you take time, right, there's going to be a good product anyways. So you have to plan it, you have to reduce the gap, you have to understand what the value these different stakeholders are looking for in the chain actually, and then work on that. Alright, so I'll skip this part, because the software development has gone through a history of different development models, right, with the changing needs of the software product in the marketplace, right. And if you look at in today's time, the most popular approach is Agile Scrum, and it's just the need which is there in the marketplace and the kind of product that need to be delivered in the marketplace has made this model popular. And along with it, right, the main focus is basically that the team should work together, and what they deliver, right, is in small increments, and the gap in terms of the requirement that they are understanding and delivering in the marketplace, that gap is reduced. And for that, the various practices like TDD and BDD also are helping to reduce the gap. Now, these practices are good, right? But I will still say, if the team can work on their own, right, without even these practices, it's fantastic actually, right? Sometimes the communication is so good between the teams that they don't need any kind of tools or things like that, and they can still deliver a good quality product, right? We spent many years. So I worked for almost 13 years at Adobe. And I used to work, I worked for long years in the Acrobat group. And when Agile Scrum came in, we didn't feel any change actually, right? Because pretty much the way we were working, it was in the Agile way only, right? Okay, so I'll skip this part. This is the Scrum. Okay. Now, when basically this thing was there that you have to, deliver the product in small increments, at a regular interval, right? So it was very critical that the quality be maintained in the marketplace, right? And I'm talking about a paradigm when there were desktop application. the release cycle used to be 24 months, right? So, and then it reduced down to 18 months, right? And then it reduced down to, around 12 months, right? Now when you see, right, with online portals like Amazon or Expedia and so on, right, the delivery cycle is almost, weekly and fortnightly, right? And even for the desktop products which Adobe makes, for example, Photoshop, Acrobat and so on, right, with the new kind of, they have done away with the perpetual licensing, right, and the features get, shipped in increments, right? It's a subscription model, right? So it's pretty much like an online product now actually. Though it is the bunch is sitting on the desktop, but the way the releases are happening, they are happening similar to the online fashion, right? So the point here is that in short increments, when you have to deliver the product increments, right? One of the key challenges is how do you make sure, right? Number one, that the new things that you're going to deliver are well understood, articulated, coded, tested and delivered. Alright. At the same time, what was earlier there, right? Nothing has broken down over there. So obviously your regression, suite goes big, right? So in that limited time frame, you have to do a lot of stuff. Okay. So one of the practices, or at the core of the software product are the lines of code that get written out, right? So typical to a building structure, right? The bricks and the mortar, right, which make a building. So in case of a software, it's just a line of code, right? Now, if the quality of that line of code is not good, right, then everything is, will have a ripple effect. So keeping that in mind, a practice called TDD was brought in, and TDD was basically, so TDD is a testing activity or design activity?
Design.
All right. How many say it's a testing activity?
It's both.
It's both?
Yeah.
Okay. Who said both?
Designing through testing.
Design and?
Designing through testing.
Designing through testing. Okay. Okay. So yeah, it is both, but it is primarily a design activity, right? That's one thing you really have to understand. That TDD is a design activity. Of course, the tests that get written out, right, later on can be used, right, as a kind of a regression test suite, right? But fundamentally, right, to start with, it is a design activity. Now, why do we say design activity? Given a requirement or a feature, a person who has to code, right, is going to first write a test scenario, okay, and he will run that test, and the test will fail or pass. It will fail, right? Why it will fail? Because there is no product code written over there, right? Then he is going to write the product code, and then again run the test, right? And his intention would be to basically have just minimally sufficient, code written, which will make the test pass, right? So this approach basically was to avoid, writing unnecessary code which, may not be needed and need to be just thrown away, right? So it's just waste of time, which is basically waste of resources and adds to the cost of product, right? Which is a software product, and hence reduces the bottom lines. All right, so that was the TDD approach, and now there was a problem with the TDD approach, that even then the quality had basically gaps, right? That what was getting delivered in terms of what the users and customers were expecting in the marketplace, there were gaps. So why this problem could be there? Any thoughts? Now you have the test written, then only the code is getting written, right? And even then there are problems.
It's not comprehensive enough.
It's not comprehensive enough, okay?
You're
You
not,
don't know what the customer wants yet.
you're,
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Very good. Yeah.
you're not describing the behavior, you're describing the implementation.
Excellent, excellent, fantastic. Yes, sir.
Usually the tests for test-driven development are at unit level. And when you put different units together, integrate and so on, there are many possibilities for not meeting customer requirements.
Fantastic. So yeah, bang on actually, right? Because they were more, first is that it was to aid the programmer, right? To program the code, right? So, whatever his understanding, right, of the feature was, so based on that he wrote the, the test code, right, and then wrote the subsequent program, right? So there was no touch point as say, which basically, integrated with the business requirement, right? Of course, in terms of, whatever communication level was there with the business person, right? That much communication was there, and then pretty much, the business person didn't know, right, what he has captured, right, on the basis of which he is going to write the production code, right? So the challenge was that how do we basically bring the business person in this complete flow, right, so that the whole thing end to end is integrated, right? So that so we make sure that the code is getting written per the test that the program is going to write. But what about those tests themselves? Are they basically, aligned properly with the requirement itself, right? So we needed a mechanism to bridge that gap, and that's where basically, the whole thing related to that, the question of are we building the thing right or are we building the right thing, right? So there's a distinction between this, right? So that was the thing that needed to be addressed, right? Now, so the solution for this was that we have to provide a means of describing the behavior of a feature in non-technical terms, right? Because a test code which is written by the programmer, right? The business person may not be interested in that. No, I don't want to look at it, right? I've told you the requirement, you got it, just do it, right? So we needed something which basically, a means of describing the behavior and then integrating it with the test code that is getting written. That was the challenge that was there. And that is where basically the concept of BDD came in, right? So BDD was developed by a person called Dan North in 2003 as an extension of test-driven development to provide more accurate way of taking features and translating them into requirement. That is, provide a means of describing the behavior of a feature in non-technical terms, right? So now you may say, the feature description may have been there in the feature files, right? In case of, the SRIs or the PRDs that get written out, right? But more than often, right, the challenge was that, again, it was left to the interpretation of the person who is programming it and the level of detailing which was there in the product requirement document or in the basically the SRS which was there, right? Now, some people may, write very detailed ones, some people may not write detailed ones, and even in the agile teams that I work with, the concept of user story, right? So everybody familiar with user story concept, right? So the user story are one-liner actually, right? As a dash, I want to dash such that dash, right? Now with that kind of story, what are the challenges you have faced? So even when you basically implement a user story, the product owner comes and tells me, okay, this is not what I wanted actually. So what are the challenges you guys, I'd like to hear, what are the challenges you have faced with the user stories?
Understanding it.
It keeps on extending.
It's sometimes just difficult to understand.
It's very cryptic.
What's needed.
Yeah, it's very difficult what's needed. Okay?
It's
So,
ambiguous.
huh?
It's ambiguous.
It's ambiguous. Yeah, it's ambiguous, right?
It does not have all the cases covered.
It doesn't have all the cases covered. Fantastic, right? So what we call in Agile as definition of done, right? So definition of done in many cases is skipped, right? Because it takes some amount of effort, right, to jot down those definition of done, right? And definition of done is very critical, right? Now some product owners, are quite methodical. They will write, in fact, too much detail, right? It again becomes, overwhelming detail, right? To absorb. And some, they just shy away. You know what to do, right? Just go and do it. But what do you want? What does the user customer want? That's basically, the beginning of the gap which starts to happen, right? And you reach the end of the sprint, right? And you give it to the product owner and say, no, you have not covered these two cases. But you never told them. No, I was busy with other stuff. I have a lot of other things to do. So, you don't get any story points, and then the spillover is to the next sprint, and that impacts the release cycle. Okay, so let me start with an example. Any questions so far? Or you doing good? Okay. So let's take a very easy example of a calculator application, right? And let's say the addition feature which is there for the calculator. A simple story might be like, as a user I want to add two numbers such that I get the sum of the numbers, right? And the examples could be, for example, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, 2 plus 4 is equal to 48. I've taken the equivalence partitioning on the output side, where I'm basically taking single digit, double digit, 3 digits and so on, right? So these kind of things could be there, alright? So how do we go about doing the behavioral development for it, right? I need a mechanism to capture this requirement and make it executable, right? That what I'm talking about is that the requirement itself should be executable. So it is something like, if I write this, let's say user story, right? And if I click it, right? So it should run the corresponding code behind, right? And give me the result. Yes, the code is in place and all the scenarios are working fine or not, right? That kind of a thing we are talking about, right? So that, once the, let's say the product owner writes this kind of a user story, right? At any given point of time, he can, go and check, okay, fine, whatever things I wanted, are they working or not? And whatever things he wanted, he can basically put them in the form of these examples. And when these examples are running, like for him, it is done thing, because that is the basis of definition of done for him. Alright? Okay, so here is what this scenario looks like. That is, given the input is 2 plus 2, when the calculator is run, then the output should be 4. So it's basically very simple plain English language, right? So can I capture this information and run it as it is above, just like that? So that would be really cool, isn't it? And that exactly, what we want to do, and we are going to do that. So let us say I write something like this. I say feature colon, the feature is addition, right? And then I say the scenario is adding of two numbers, right? And I just write this English text. Given the input is 2 plus 2, when the calculator is run, then the output should be 4, right? So this is basically the feature description which is there. Now I need some mechanism to run these steps, right? And that's what basically brings us to the concept of step definitions, and I'll come more what technically this means. But for now, let us try to understand that there is this basically the integration part that I talked about, right? That is, which is going to glue it to the code which is going to be shipped, is something like this. That given whatever this regular expression is, right, and whatever in the code says, I capture that, okay, in the variable called captured input. Okay? So in the variable called captured input, right? And then I pass on the value to a local input variable over here, right? Which basically, so this was the given situation, right? And then in the when part of the regular expression which is there, right, I say do what? Just forget about the programming part right now, that there is this calculator application, run that, but pass this local value which is there. And what is this local value? Which is 2 plus 2, which I am capturing over here, right? So it goes in over here, and whatever the output is, I capture in this local variable, local underscore output. And this is basically if it fails and all those, so just forget about that for the time being. And once it is done, then what we need to do is, again, pick up this regular expression and capture this value as a captured expected value. And I want that this local output which has come should be equal to the captured expected output, right? So this, what it does is that it has basically, this, what I have written as a feature and scenario and given this and when this and then this, I have glued it, right, to the actual execution of the calculator application, right, and then, whatever was in the high level English language, I have captured that and tried to put a verification step into whether it is working or not. Does that make sense? Right? So, anybody has any doubt before we proceed further can ask now.
Who writes the BDD?
Huh?
Who writes it? The product manager or the...
Very good question, sir. I'll come to that. Right? So, I'll come to that. Excellent. Okay. And then, for the purpose of this example, I have created a very basic prototype of the calculator, right? So this is Ruby actually. You don't need to get into the Ruby, context at the moment, but just try to understand that if you execute this code, what it's going to take is basically it is going to take the expression, evaluate that, and print the output. So for example, if I pass 2 plus 2, it is going to evaluate it and print. So it is going to return 4 value. If I say 2/2, it is going to return value 1. All right. Make sense? Okay, so this is a very basic prototype of a calculator. Now the thing is that I've got the high level language, description of what I want. I've got this glue code, right, which is going to glue everything to the calculator application, right? But then somebody has to basically, run this whole thing together, right? So who's going to do that? That is where the Cucumber tool comes in. So Cucumber is basically to tie the whole thing together and run this for us, right? So let me just show you a demo quickly. So if I were to, okay, so here it is, right? So I created a folder called features, right? And in that basically I have this. Is it visible to everybody? Yeah, font is okay. Okay. So the user, so I've just basically copy pasted the whole stuff, right? In this file called a feature file, which is adding.feature file, right? And then what I do is basically the steps, the glue thing that was there, I captured in a steps file, and then I basically put this whole thing over there, right? And I have a calculator.ruby file, which is basically doing this stuff, right? And if I place this in a folder structure like this, where basically in the features I have this, and then there's this calculator RB, and if I were to so if I were to run Cucumber on this folder, right? So let's see what happens. Okay, so it has basically, evaluated the whole expression and passed the test. Now if I basically go and change the value, for example, over here, let's say I say it should be equal to 3, right? And then I run this example, right? Let's see what happens. So it fails the test, right? Because 2 plus 2, the evaluation, the calculator prototype gave was 4. But the expected value that I put in the test is 3. So it has failed. So it's very, straightforward, right? In the sense you capture the requirement in the high level English language. There was a gluing thing which was there, right? In the form of the regular expression it captured. And then it basically invoked the application, which was the actual application under test. That is a calculator.ruby file which was there. So this was basically, one very simple example in which we captured the behavior, right, and then how we use the Cucumber tool, right, to work the whole thing end to end. Okay. Now, if we go back to our slide, there were other examples also. For example, 2 plus 2 was there. Then what was the other one? 1 plus 2 plus 48, right? 1 plus 98 and so on. Now, if I were to run these multiple examples, then what do? So I need a mechanism to capture the different examples, and the Cucumber provides that mechanism as well. So what I'm going to do is I'll just illustrate. So what I'm going to do in that case, instead of writing scenario, I will write something as scenario outline, right? And then the whole thing, and in the form of tables, right? This kind of a table, I'll capture the input and the output. Alright? Make sense? It's fairly simple, right? Now if I run this, application or this test, right? So it will evaluate all of them and tell me. Now in your definition of done, right, you can capture these examples, right? And then make sure, you can go and talk to your product owner or product manager. Okay, so these are some of the critical scenarios you think, right? Do you think there is any other critical scenario which need to be captured, right? So make sure, that thing is addressed. Okay. Is it making sense? Everybody, you getting it? Alright, great. Now the other thing is, so we have seen multiple examples, right? But there could be multiple features as well. So we have just looked at one feature, which was addition feature. So there could be now, subtraction, division, and so on and so forth. So how do we basically capture other features? So to do that, I'll again show you an example. So where is it? So I have this addition feature you have already seen, right? So I have this one file which has captured the addition part. Similarly, I create another file which is the division file, right? And in this again I capture the information about what this feature is going to do and what are the inputs and what are the outputs I expect. So for example, 2 by 2 should give me output as 1, 4 by 2 should give me output as 2. Alright? And now when I run this kind of a application, so it will run both the features, right, and whatever examples are there and give it output, right, as you can see. So first it has done for the addition and then for the division. And when you basically have this kind of features added up and this kind of steps written down, right, for multiple features, square root, logarithm and blah 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 blah, right, and whenever you are entering a new run, right, you just run the suit and you know that everything is working fine or not, right. All right. So that's what okay. All right. So that's basically the basic concept about the Cucumber and the BDD. So let me now delve a little into what is Cucumber, right? So you have got a taste of what Cucumber is, right? So it helps you basically integrate the requirement and the basically steps which will translate that requirement right into connecting with the actual code which is there and run the requirement on that actual code. Okay, so that's what the Cucumber is going to help me do. Okay, so yeah.
I got lost in Cucumber. Which part of code is Cucumber? There is a tool. I'm lost.
Okay, okay. So you got the part about the feature? Did you get that?
Yeah.
Okay. You got the part about the steps that which will capture the feature, right? And then try to execute those features, right? And then how in that step the actual code, right, which is basically the application, calculator application was invoked. You got that, right? Now the tool that is basically going to connect the three of them, right, is what Cucumber is doing, right? So when I type Cucumber in the folder structure over here, so if you see in the folder calculator, if you see over here, right, I have a feature folder and a so I have a feature folder, right, this is a directory, okay, and there is this basically application under test, right, okay. So this is the application that I want to test, right, and this has basically the features and the steps that are going to connect the requirement with this application under test. Got it? So this is the structure that I have put, and prior to this I would obviously have installed the Cucumber tool, right? So that is a prerequisite which has to be there, that the Cucumber tool is installed. Now in this kind of a folder structure, when I run Cucumber, then what happens is that it basically looks for a feature folder, right? And inside this it looks for the feature files, right? And one by one it picks up the feature file, right, and looks for the corresponding glue code, right? That is where the steps are being defined, right? And then runs them, right, matching the regular expressions, right? So that is the activity that is being done by Cucumber. Got it? All right, great. Anybody else? Anything? Yes.
Is it the product owner who writes the script definitions or the...
So he asked that question, I'll come to that, right? So just let's try to understand that, because yeah, it's a practicing, I'll come to that, hold on to that part, but great question. Okay. Alright, so Cucumber is basically, it's a tool that implements, helps to implement BDD and bring the BDD in reality, in our projects. So as you have seen, it is very easy to write the BDD requirements, right? And it bridges the gap between different stakeholders, especially the business, customers, engineers, and the team. And they start to serve as the acceptance test. Okay, so this is what you expect here. That this feature should work, and these are the examples that you expect should be working fine. Or is there anything else, right? So you can capture that part. Now, who's going to write it? The person, who's responsible for the business is supposed to write the features, right? Okay, and one of the biggest pitfalls, right, which I have seen with some of the teams that I have, consulted on behavior development is that, people who are doing the testing, right, and at times, the programmers, right, they are basically writing the feature files, which is not the thing. Then the whole purpose is lost actually, right? Then, you might as well, we are happy doing, unit testing or, the TDD approach which was there, right? So that is not the purpose. So then it's a waste of time. Or maybe just another approach for you to basically, program and test, right? But it is not basically a methodology which I have really, captured in essence in terms of, involving the business people in capturing the requirement and then giving it to the engineering team. All right? Okay. So hopefully that answers a little bit of what you guys were asking. Okay. So more specifically, we have already seen that it enables capturing features and their scenarios, right? And enables running those scenarios, enables verifying the results, and the examples, for example, the example that we covered. And in the long run, basically, it starts to become a living documentation for the features that we have, right? All the features. Okay. So it is not unit testing. Let me clarify, right? It is not system testing, right? So it should not be used, right, to do boundary testing, right, or equivalence partitioning, right? Because the purpose of BDD is to capture the business rule, right? Okay, so only the things which the business people think are critical, right, in terms of capturing the business rules should be basically taken into the BDD approach. Now, many a times I have seen teams, what they do is, they will start to make them as full-fledged, what do you say, test data kind of a repository, right? And they would have, like these example tables would be running into, like 50 or 100 and so on. That's not the purpose of BDD actually, right? That you can do with any kind of a data-driven framework which you are using already, and you know it.
But boundary condition would be important. What
So
happens if, let's say, there is a boundary condition and the experience that the user gets is really bad?
if it is a business rule, right, then it should be captured, right? But if it is not a business rule, right, then it may be left,
For example,
for the
division by 0.
division by 0 may not be a business rule, right? So it will come in test cases definitely as a boundary, but may not be a requirement in the feature file, right, as an example. But if it is a business rule, right, then definitely.
Last question about product owners writing the feature files. I think we kind of tried to do something like that, and
you might have also tried to get the definition of done also from the product owners. So
just at the end, it's really a mess. Like as an automation engineer, I'm taking this feature file, and those steps are, pretty much describing the same thing, but those are not matching, so I have to rewrite those to,
rewrite the feature file.
to reuse the steps. Yeah, because the people who are writing the feature files, they don't care. They're not, trying to reuse the steps. They're just writing the story.
Yeah, so that's why, in the initial, when I set the context, it is very important as a team how you are working, right? And that starts to basically bring the gaps and lowers down the quality of the product, and also basically, the way the team is operating, right? So it's more of a behavioral issue, right, of a product owner, and product owner need to be educated, right? Otherwise, just do whatever you do.
No, I'm just pretty much asking for your experience here.
So it is
you have seen that writing,
it's a behavioral issue, right? And many a times, team fall apart, right, because of the behavioral issues between the product owners, right, and the engineering teams actually. So it happens, right? And it's not an easy problem because it's a behavioral problem, right? Just an education or a coach, external coach can help, but at times there are personality issues, even an external coach can't do anything, right? Because I dealt with a team, I'll tell you, right? In one of the releases, the product owner was absolutely fantastic, all disciplined, everything. But in the next one release, right, he would not show up in the daily scrum at all. So now what do you do, right? And since you're working as a team, it doesn't make sense to escalate it, right? Because then you break apart the team anyways, right? Because the mutual trust is lost. But it came to a point that you escalated, and I knew what was happening after escalation. He turned into more defensive, right? So it's, you have to really drive a team dynamics actually, right? And the critical element of team dynamics is the level of integrity, right? So I will not get into that.
There is one more dimension here. For example, product owner would not have a skill set or expertise to know that, okay, these steps could be reused. While as automation engineer, he would want to reuse them.
For that, product owner needs to be a little bit technical, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the skill set is different. You cannot expect that.
So reusing all the steps,
I mean, for example, they are, these are steps, right? Each of them.
Sorry. So these are basically, for different features, right? You have different feature files, right? So each is basically having its own set of things. Yes, there would be, reusability, and the reusability comes in the form of, there is a term in the Cucumber, it's called background, right? So the reusable steps which are there, you can basically clump them together as background, right? So this syntax is called gherkin, right? And the knowledge of gherkin has to be understood by the product owner. If he doesn't understand the gherkin, right, then obviously you have a challenge, right? And also an underlying thing about the various things which are going to come in the regular expressions, right, in the codes that you have seen, right? So the nomenclature and so on, right? You have to set some kind of a best practice or some kind of a, rule for that. That, okay, for username I'm going to use this username, right, for whatever, right? So you may have basically a list of these keywords, that these keywords mean this thing and this is what you're going to use in the feature file that you're going to write, right? Because otherwise then you will end up in a mess, as you said, right? Because sometimes you're using some term, sometimes you use some term, right? The testing person is using some term, right? So it will be all messy.
Exactly. Yeah, it just the easiest example is that like I go to homepage and in the next sprint it's like I am landing on a homepage and I have to rewrite it because I'm engineering.
Right.
So a lot of times, to add to Ganesh's point, these are two different use cases that you're trying to solve, and then you can always build tooling around those as well. A lot of times, I've seen people build like a web interface where things that are already existent would be a drop down, and if you need to add anything, like if they don't know something exists, they're just not going to use it. If they know something exists, then they would actually use it. So having some kind of easy mechanism for them to find that information makes it a lot more easier. And I think, as you pointed out, BDD solves a different use case where you want to bridge the gap between getting the information from product versus engineers actually writing the test. So something to watch out for. More questions.
Yeah.
So if that is the case, how to distinguish test cases, like manual test cases versus automation test scripts versus?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, during the discussion that was happening, right, it is just to basically capture the business rules, right? For doing a full-blown testing, right, you still have to write the test cases, right, you still have to prepare the test data, and you still have to have a database-driven framework for your automation. Alright, and then whatever refactoring you want to do in terms of basically reusability of the components, be it page object models and so on, you got to implement that.
So still we can use BDD for that? Like
Of course, and that's what we are going to come to, right?
And take 15 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so quickly, basically, we have seen, it was a command line tool, right? And then, we captured the specifications in plain language text features, and I showed you in English, right? But Cucumber supports 60 other languages, right? So Norwegian, Spanish, right? German, so you can write in that, right? Okay. And then examine them for the different scenarios that we wrote, right? And each scenario has the steps, right, which the Cucumber walks through, so that the Cucumber can understand these feature files. They must follow some basic syntax, and which I told you is called the gherkin. So gherkin is a plain English text, right? And basically the purpose of gherkin is that people who don't want to get into programming, right, in some high level language like English or German or Spanish, they can write the requirement following this syntax. And the keywords which are there are like feature, scenario, given, when, then, and, but, right, background, scenario outline, examples, and then some additional ones like docstring, data table, tags, and comments, right? So I'll skip this part. Let's move on. So I think since we have less time, I'll skip these parts. Primarily, basically, what the scenario does is, it sets up the initial context then an event and action happens, and then basically what is expected an outcome, and we have basically assertions to see that this is working fine or not. I'll skip this part. Okay, now, so this was a basically simple desktop application, right? And what about the web application part? So can we, do behavior development for web applications, and can we use Cucumber for that? And that's what basically brings us to the question of that. So Cucumber, first question to ask is Cucumber a browser automation tool? The answer is no. It's a behavior-driven development tool, right? So what is, which one is a browser automation tool? There are a bunch of them, and one of them is Selenium, right? And can the two work together? The answer is yes for that. So I'll show you a simple demo, right? That way it is better. So this is a a local application that I've created, right, for demoing purpose and for the various courses that I run. It's called Wiz Trial, right? So when I launch this on the local host on my setup, right, and if I type in my name in this login, right, and password, right, okay, okay, so it logs in, right, and it has bunch of links over here, right. So these are the links. If I click on